There is a beautiful simplicity to Ghost of Tsushima, from its art direction to its open world design, all the way down to its progression systems and gameplay elements. Even though in today's environment we are swamped with so many open world titles, it's rare to find one that tries to do something a little different. I wouldn't say Ghost of Tsushima pushes the boundaries of open world design or anything, but the way it brings its relatively simple features together and ties them directly into the narrative atop a gorgeously vibrant depiction of Tsushima Island gives the game so much personality. Many titles fail to achieve this kind of thing, and it's something the developers at Sucker Punch deserve a lot of credit for. Ultimately, that is what makes it stand out the most to me, and certainly what made it stand out when I first played the game back in 2020. After my initial playthrough, I deemed it my all-time favorite PlayStation exclusive alongside The Last of Us Remastered. It didn't have the same knockout surprise punch that God of War 2018 had, nor did it have the same hauntingly fascinating lore and world design that Bloodborne had, nor did it have the same ambitious, grueling narrative that The Last of Us Part 2 had. If anything, the game is pretty safe, all things considered. There's nothing here that is particularly groundbreaking or innovative, except perhaps its means of navigation, but that didn't matter because the gameplay experience was fun. Combat felt satisfying, there was a wonderful flow to encounters. Exploration was organic with its use of visual cues, eliminating the need to consult the map every few minutes. Stealth was greatly rewarding, it gave the player a degree of freedom in how they approach things. But for me, what really elevated this game was its conclusion. The ending to Ghost of Tsushima is so moving, it never fails to give me goosebumps. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. I love this game, and in this video I will explain why, highlighting everything great about it, whilst also pointing out areas I believe could have been handled better. There will be major spoilers here, so take care. Ghost of Tsushima follows the tale of Jin Sakai during the first Mongol invasion of Japan and their initial landing on Tsushima Island. Jin becomes the last remaining samurai, and his quest to drive the Mongols from his home is the central focus of the game. It is loosely based on historical events, but the story it tells is completely fictional. The various systems that make up Ghost of Tsushima are remarkably harmonious, and the world itself is no exception. As the protagonist, Jin displays a special affinity with his birthplace, something the game repeatedly highlights as early as the opening sequence. In it, we see him riding across the island atop his steed, and there's one point where he holds his hand out to feel the grass, something he does on occasion past this sequence as well. It's a tiny detail, but it serves to emphasize Jin's connection with his home. Tsushima Island is stunning, full of beautiful rolling landscapes coated with bold, vibrant colors that help make everything pop. There's a very distinct natural quality to it as well, with an abundance of flora and fauna as far as the eye can see. And it's the way the game combines this with Jin's connection that defines how exploration is handled. The vivid colors make visual cues easily identifiable. Plumes of smoke and fiery sparks bellowing into the air act as clear signage, indicating points of interest. Natural elements like golden birds, a representation of Jin's mother, as well as colorful flowers provide direction in place of traditional waypoints or a minimap. To add to that, I really enjoy the one or two mythical tales where you're given a map to follow, but the map itself is just a simple drawing. You still need to explore and match the landscape to it, which I find engaging. Then of course we have Guiding Wind, a representation of Jin's father and another means of underlining his connection to the land. The idea to use wind as the primary means of navigation is the most innovative thing about Ghost of Tsushima. It's just a simple, clever means of complementing the game's approach to exploration, another natural element that works in tandem with all the others perfectly. There's no screen clutter, no obstruction of your view, no consistent breaks in the flow of gameplay, and since it only guides in a general direction, it has players think spatially. You must consider the topography of your destination and adjust accordingly. So not only is it fantastic for immersion, but it also fits thematically and mechanically. All these features come together and result in a freeform style of exploration. There is a world map, and admittedly it is very helpful, but the visual cues, the natural elements, the minimalistic HUD, and the guiding wind makes exploration organic, and even today I find it refreshing. There's an undeniable charm in discovering things on your own, or by venturing off the beaten path. It feels rewarding, and the game goes out of its way to satiate the player's curiosity. The world itself encourages the player to discover it. It also helps that certain aspects are streamlined in a way that makes traveling across the land very straightforward. I generally try to limit my use of fast travel in games, but at least here it is fast and seamless. You open your map, pick a destination you've previously visited, and travel there instantly. And if you fast travel on your horse, you arrive at your destination on your horse. Some other examples include NPCs match your running speed, no animation for gathering resources, you're given an option to descend mountains or shrines you've just climbed, and so on and so forth. These are very minor design choices, but they make the process of traveling more enjoyable. I also like that your horse will appear behind you no matter where you are with the push of a button, a bit like Roach from The Witcher 3. And if you want more evidence of that, just check this out. This is big Roach energy right here. To quickly touch on this, I really enjoy the bond Jin shares with his horse in this game. He comes to him when he's grieving, and the small moments where they're taking a nap together are quite sweet. It feels like they have a genuine connection. Now, this kind of thing is great. I appreciate the approach to exploration here, but unfortunately, Ghost of Tsushima falls into the classic trap of adding repetitive tedium to its open world. For the sake of clarity, I'm referring to the minor busy work here, as opposed to Mongol camps and side quests, which I'll get to later. Look, I love petting foxes. I do it at every opportunity. In fact, it's really quite sad when there is no fox to pet after completing an Inari shrine. And I enjoy the satisfaction of slicing bamboo sticks, but when combined with the other stuff like the traversal sections to reach shrines, hot springs, haikus and all that, there's just too much of it, and it gets tiring around the game's second act. It's a shame because all these activities provide rewards that go a long way in affecting your current standing, specifically in combat. More resolve, increased health, better charms, resources to upgrade your gear, and so on. There's legitimate value to be found in the busy work, and that is awesome. So many games fill their world with pointless shit that has no bearing on anything and feel like a complete waste of time. Ghost of Tsushima, at the very least, gives you tangible rewards that affect gameplay directly for completing busy work. For most of the game anyway, but it's sort of counterbalanced by the sheer volume of it all, and during the second and third act, I was just ignoring a lot of it. I think it would have been better if the busy work was scaled back and provided bigger rewards to compensate. As it is now, rewards are handed out in incremental values, which effectively necessitates a large volume of them. That may be a bit tricky, as the world itself would probably have to be scaled back as well, although that could be beneficial in more ways than one, because already, I feel like large stretches of Tsushima Island are pretty barren. The landscape is consistently gorgeous, and I know it's not exactly the most populous place going, but so much of it is empty, and even the towns and villages don't do much to alleviate that. Many of the NPCs feel lifeless and only seem to serve as added backdrop to fill out the scenery. A few of them can provide valuable information, potentially leading to points of interest, but it's quite common to hear the same thing multiple times from different people, which has these interactions come off as very artificial. Furthermore, these settlements are not dynamic at all. No one reacts when they see the very last samurai on the island prancing through their village. It would be cool if NPCs' behavior changed in response to Jin's presence, but that never really happens. Maybe that's a nitpick, but I think it would make the entire island feel more alive. The game already succeeds at this wonderfully with the animals and plant life, so I find it a shame that the actual inhabitants don't quite live up to that. The only exception to this is in the side quests, but those are all scripted sequences that need to be initiated, so they're not natural parts of the environment. As for the quality of those side quests, I'd say they're okay, and that's being generous. Every single one is used to reinforce the devastation the Mongol invasion has inflicted upon the people of Tsushima Island, and some of them are quite powerful. This game explores heavy subject matter including domestic violence, child slavery, revenge, betrayal, and the general atrocities that come with war, all of which is juxtaposed against the natural beauty of this setting. The side quests focus on the common folk, and whilst there are some interesting stories to be found here, they're all one-shots and there isn't much in the way of compelling dialogue. They all share similar structures as well. You talk to the quest giver, something bad has happened, kill a bunch of bad guys, return to the quest giver, who may very well be dead by the time you're back, and then it's over. On top of this, certain aspects of the quest design start to wear out their welcome. The constant tracking, trailing enemies, surveying the area. You do this a lot throughout your playthrough, and it gets tiring. Not to mention it negatively affects the pacing. There are no surprises in the side quests, no delving into the unknown. It's basically all the same, and I think that is a problem. I understand things are limited in terms of scope given the setting, but greater variation would have been beneficial, I feel. I certainly don't think this game needs frivolous activities like fishing. I know fishing is something samurai practiced, but do we really have time to go fishing when our relatively tiny island is getting decimated by the Mongols? I don't think we do. The only truly memorable side quests to me are those involving Yuriko and the one where you avenge a group of foxes. For the latter, you find the corpse of a dead fox and then another fox leads you to the Mongols who did it. Turns out they've slaughtered a whole family of them, and I tell ya, I have never been more motivated to kill Mongols than I was during this quest. It stands out because it's something a little different, a subversion of expectations where the environment does the heavy lifting, and the fox guiding you is just a cute addition that gives the quest some charm. Yuriko's questline is distinct because it is incredibly poignant. It's an exploration of Jin's family, so there's a personal aspect to it for him, but it slowly shifts towards Yuriko herself. There are a couple signs early on that something isn't quite right with her, and by the end of the questline it becomes clear that she is suffering from some kind of dementia. And it is extremely heavy. The way Jin goes along with it, how he takes up the role of his father in Yuriko's final moments, is deeply somber, but I do like that he displays enough emotional maturity to give her peace as she passes, which I guess is a silver lining of sorts. There is an interesting dichotomy with Jin in that, as the story progresses, he becomes more compassionate and empathetic towards others, especially those of a lower social standing, while simultaneously becoming a more ruthless and brutal killer. And this does somewhat extend to the side quests. During them, Jin is very level-headed and usually acts as the voice of reason, but in the main narrative he's a bit more unhinged, often letting his emotions dictate his actions and justifying them every time. Even though the side quests vary in quality, I do think Sucker Punch have done a good job of focusing them, so they all revolve around the island's inhabitants, as Jin is given a platform of sorts to show how he conducts himself, leading to this dichotomy. I don't mean to sound contradictory here, since they are limited in terms of scope, as I said previously, but at the very least they are not completely disconnected from the protagonist. Where questing gets better is in the mythical tales and the character-specific tales. For the former, the entire concept of them lends itself to better design. They follow a legendary story and require a bit more from the player, usually in the form of multiple steps of exploration. You're given a set of clues which you must investigate piece by piece, and it's not always obvious what you have to do or where you must go next, and as such they are very engaging. It also helps that the rewards they give are awesome, and the presentation with the inkwash painting is lovely and adds to their mystique. Furthermore, a few of the mythical tales are natural parts of the environment, like the Six Blades of Kojiro and the unbreakable Gosaku. It's not necessary to have initiated the quest to start progressing them, which is something I believe works in their favor. The character-specific tales with Lady Masako, Sensei Ishikawa, and Norio are quest chains that revolve around a singular character's story, so unsurprisingly they are more fleshed out and far more interesting to me. There's a real anger to be found in these tales, and it's an individual anger unique to each character. Like the side quests, they display the brutality of war and how it changes people. I've always found Lady Masako's tale to be the best, personally. There are connecting threads from the very beginning when you meet Junshin at the Golden Temple, and after much investigation, he ends up being the one to lead you to the perpetrator of the Adachi clan massacre. There's a lot of mystery along the way as you search for the truth, which lends itself to a degree of intrigue. And on top of that, there are some twists I was not expecting in the slightest, like Masako's secret lover and her sister being the mastermind behind her clan's destruction. This tale has interesting developments that make it the most memorable to me. Norio's tale is pretty underwhelming in my opinion. The final few quests are very dark, but I've never liked how it sort of fizzles out at the end after he goes on a murderous rampage to avenge his brother. With that said, this outcome is interesting to think about because it demonstrates the darker side of the Ghost's influence. Norio is a warrior monk, but he comes off as a gentle giant in our early interactions with him. But after he learns what the Mongols did to his brother, he massacres an entire fort, even going as far as burning them alive, just as they did to Lord Adachi in the opening sequence. It is seriously dark, and crucially, he justifies it by saying he did what the Ghost would do. It's one of the few times we see the negative impact of the Ghost on the people around him, and that makes it unique. Until this point though, Norio's tale is rather forgettable. Then we have Sensei Ishikawa and the pursuit of his protege turned enemy named Tomoe. Overall, this is unremarkable stuff, but I do enjoy how both Jin and Ishikawa question each other's integrity, and they both give each other reason to do so. Ishikawa knows Jin is committing to the Ghost, and the sensei talks a big game, often taking a moral high ground, but he repeatedly lies during this tale, and it has the two of them clash frequently. Through this, we get some memorable dialogue.
You talk about what it means to be a warrior, how Tomoe undermines that. But you and she are the same.
You expect us to be perfect. Your uncle, me, Masako Adachi. But only a child expects perfection of his elders.
Finish your thought, Sensei.
We all carry weapons. We all choose between life and death.
And you're too comfortable with that power.
And if I weren't, I would be dead. And so would you, Ghost.
Not everyone can be a samurai.
But we're all killers.
Like Norio's tale, although not quite to the same degree, I feel this story sort of fizzles out a bit. Really, the main attraction here is the dynamic between Jin and Ishikawa in the lead-up to finding Tomoe. Afterwards, she scurries away to the mainland, Ishikawa comes to terms with his actions, and he and Jin come to terms with each other. I can't help but feel it is somewhat anticlimactic. There seems to be an underlying theme here of characters breaking traditional molds, just like Jin does. Ishikawa lets his emotions get the better of him and creates a dangerous archer off the back of it. Masako's behavior is extremely reckless as she is blinded by her pursuit of revenge, and Norio ultimately goes back on his vow to never swing his weapon in hatred. This is pure conjecture on my part, but I don't think it's a coincidence that this idea of breaking vows and turning your back on what you once believed in is present in each of these tales. It would form a strong link to what Jin experiences in the main narrative, and it may be part of the reason why these characters are more empathetic towards the Ghost than others. These tales are a step up in terms of storytelling, but when it comes to gameplay, they all suffer from the same issues that side quests suffer from, and in some ways the repetitiveness is even worse. So much of Ishikawa's tale plays out in the same way again and again. He finds a lead on Tomoe, we follow her tracks, we encounter a Mongol camp who are doing things that she taught them, forcing us to kill them all. Then there's some banter about Ishikawa's decision-making in life and Jin questioning him, just for him to snap back and rebuke Jin. Even if the dialogue is good, this is far too repetitious. Norio's tale has a similar problem. It starts off strongly with the mission where you burn incense in the village and take out Mongols undercover, but the quests you do at Cedar Temple afterwards are all fairly alike and meld together in a noticeable way. This is another reason why I enjoy Lady Masako's tale the most. Even though every quest of hers is predicated on her finding a lead and having us investigate, the actual stuff you get up to gameplay-wise is a bit more varied. a healthy mix of stealth, traversal, and full-on combat, complete with an amazing duel against Masako herself. This is one of my favorite moments in the whole game. The entire build-up is just a joy to behold in its dialogue, atmosphere, and cinematography. It is brilliant.
Masako!
Stand aside, Jin. You betrayed my family.
Run! If we fight, Mongols win.
They already won.
All in all, questing is not this game's strongest aspect. I'm not saying there aren't any good quests, but I feel there is clear room for improvement, less repetition and more variety being the most notable takeaways. Questing does get a little better in the DLC, but we'll get to that later. Let's go back to this moment between Jin and Lady Masako. This type of cinematic presentation is a constant feature from beginning to end. I love this faraway shot immediately after their duel, with the grass up close and the falling leaves all around them. It is stunning imagery, and there are countless other examples of this all throughout the game. Shots like these exist because Ghost of Tsushima is a love letter to classic samurai cinema, and particularly the works of Akira Kurosawa, a legendary Japanese filmmaker of the 1900s. It's why you get the option for a Kurosawa mode before you start your journey, and in the menu, giving the game a grainy, black and white filter to emulate films of that time. But it doesn't end there. The way the story is told, how cutscenes are presented, and how events play out, all of it has this distinct movie-like feel. Take this scene right here, with Jin in the center of the screen beneath the lighting of the forest, or the build-up to the later confrontation between Jin and Ryuzo outside Castle Canada. These are some great shots accompanied by similarly great music that build the tension wonderfully. The duels in general are very cinematic. Each one begins with a slow introductory sequence that once again builds the tension superbly, and this is done especially well in the final two fights of the main campaign. Then there are the standoffs with their unique camera angle and delicious slowdown. The inspiration for this mechanic comes from the ending of a Kurosawa movie called Sanjuro, I think that's how you pronounce it, specifically this scene right here. Apparently, in this scene, the pump that was meant to make the losing samurai bleed blew a coupling when activated, causing it to release at full pressure rather than the intended rate, but Kurosawa ended up liking the effect and kept it in the movie. That is an interesting piece of trivia. Anyway, the point of this section was to highlight the game's specific type of cinematic presentation. It's definitely one of the more distinct aspects of Ghost of Tsushima, and the commitment from Sucker Punch to integrate it into gameplay is impressive. Kurosawa mode is quite cool, but I imagine the black and white filter can make certain quests more cumbersome than they need to be. I haven't tested it myself, but sometimes you're told to seek out flowers of a certain color, and obviously this filter will make that difficult. I also think the game is just far too pretty to play without color anyway. I must say it does make the duels feel that much more epic, but again, the black and white filter causes problems. It makes it difficult to discern between attacks you can parry and attacks you must dodge, leaving you unfairly disadvantaged. And in lethal mode, this is even more apparent. This leads us onto combat itself. Now, as far as open worlds go, Ghost of Tsushima has some of the best combat out there. Like the rest of the game, fundamentally it is very simple. Everything revolves around two types of sword swings, quick attacks and heavy attacks. The latter is used to stagger opponents and the former is used to deal damage. That is the core foundation of swordplay, and all the supplementary mechanics and equipment revolve around it. And in that regard, there is quite a lot to choose from. You got your katana, of course, but there is also archery, which I love here, ghost weapons, which are secondary tools that offer utility, and a couple extra things like ghost stance. The real joy of Ghost of Tsushima's combat is found in combining all these different elements together, and the game allows you to interchange between them at every opportunity, except in duels, where the focus is solely on your katana. This results in a dynamic combat system with a lot of options at your disposal, but the best part is that it flows. There's a fluidity to engagements in both 1 versus 1 and 1 versus many scenarios. What I'm referring to here is the battle flow, how you can dance around opponents, switching between your various stances and equipment on the fly to take them out. As I say, there's a fluidity to it, and when you become proficient, it is super satisfying in action. Achieving proficiency does require overcoming a couple hurdles though, namely getting used to the camera and the lack of a lock-on function. I remember combat feeling very ungainly when I first played the game. The opening sequence on Commodore Beach, I was basically just spamming the attack button and hoping for the best, which I assume was because there was no way to lock onto enemies. It should be noted that the director's cut includes a lock-on function for those who want it, but by the time that came out, I was already used to fighting without locking on, and now I cannot go back. Honestly, with the way battles flow and how you're repeatedly outnumbered, I believe not including a lock-on function was the correct choice. In a way, I feel it does ask a bit more from the player than usual, because a degree of camera management comes with it. The camera never moves unless you make it move, and this can lead to some unorthodox angles. Regardless, having no lock-on function contributes to the fluidity of encounters, particularly in 1 versus many scenarios, and that seems to be the entire point of its omission in the first place. You still have full control over Jin, and simply facing the enemy, or at least directing the joystick towards them, should be enough to have him target them. It's just never been a serious issue for me. I think combat benefits from its exclusion. Sword fighting in this game feels good. Every swing has weight, but they don't come across as heavy, and each attack feels like it takes a real chunk out of enemies. This is combined with some truly excellent animations that make combat smooth, stylish, and brutal. I cannot praise the animation quality for sword swings enough. They really are outstanding. Besides light and heavy attacks, we have a stab attack, which I never use because I'm a pleb, as well as the standard dodge and parry options. These can be upgraded via the very easy to understand technique page to a perfect variant, where you must perform them at the very last moment to execute a counterattack. The perfect parry is incredibly satisfying to pull off, with slowdown and great sound design to accompany it. It's arguably the most important technique to unlock, notably in duels, and thankfully it's the first option in the deflection tree. Even if it wasn't though, technique points are handed out very generously, as the page itself is huge and allows you to enhance and upgrade virtually every aspect of combat, including the force stances. A major facet of swordplay is the ability to switch between 4 different stances. Each one is used to improve the effectiveness of your heavy attack against one of 4 enemy types: swordsmen, spearmen, shieldmen, and brutes. The game loves to throw you into encounters with combinations of each type, especially in Acts 2 and 3 where the variance really ramps up. This means you must swap between stances in the heat of battle repeatedly. Attacking an enemy in the wrong stance won't make you completely ineffective, but you just get much better results in the correct one, and the game really encourages it early in the adventure. This creates something of a rock-paper-scissors dynamic. If you see a shieldman, you swap to water stance, see a spearman, you swap to wind stance, and so on and so forth. This is a system I generally enjoy. It is simplistic, but switching between stances in the middle of engagements can be quite intense. It's another way of keeping you on your toes and adding further dynamism to encounters. I don't really see the stance system as too rigid. I mean, in isolation it probably is, but again, it's the combination of different combat elements that make fighting so enjoyable. I feel stance switching is in line with all of that. It's simple, but adds to the fluidity of skirmishes, making it a harmonious part of combat. I certainly think it would need to be expanded upon if there was ever a sequel, but I feel its simplicity works in the game's favor. It gives swordplay a defined structure, and although I can see why some may deem it repetitive, I've never thought of it as such, maybe because I go out of my way to use everything in my arsenal. It's the same thing with Mongol bases. People often complain that they are repetitive cut-and-paste camps, but there are differences in enemy variety, topography, and layout, which provides a slightly different experience each time. It's nothing major, but it does allow you to carve your own path, and that is rewarding. This is amplified even further when it comes to liberating large villages, and as such it's one of my favorite things to do in this game. Part of that is because of stealth, but that's something I'll get to in a bit. Since the game places emphasis on switching to the correct stance, enemies almost always come in large groups, and this is where ghost weapons shine. These are extremely effective tools that excel at disrupting fights, preventing you from being swarmed and allowing you to take enemies out with ease. Combining this with everything else and the way encounters flow means that even when you're overwhelmed, there's never a feeling of being outmatched. This game handles one versus many engagements very well, for the most part, and the ghost weapons in particular play a big part in that. In fact, one might say they are too effective. I mean, the kunai are just incredible. They're fantastic against onrushing enemies, dealing damage and even staggering them right from the get-go. Sticky bombs and black powder bombs not only deal damage but split groups up as well, and smoke bombs incapacitate enemies, allowing you to run away or chain assassinate them. Ghost weapons don't completely trivialize fights, at least not on their own, but they offer tremendous value if used correctly. This leads me on to a bit of an issue with combat. By the end of the adventure, Jin is far too powerful and the game's challenge just drops off a cliff. If you know what you're doing and use your full arsenal to its maximum potential, engagements become a bit of a joke. The stuff you unlock as you proceed through the game start getting ridiculous. Ghost Stance is a prime example. The gameplay sequence where you receive it for the first time is awesome, but it's a totally broken technique. It lets you kill up to 3 enemies instantly with no repercussions. Then there's the blowgun, which allows you to poison enemies from afar or have them hallucinate and attack their comrades, the latter being very potent to use on brutes and leaders. And that's not even mentioning the benefits you get from outfits, all of which can be upgraded and further enhanced with charms or combat arts like Dance of Wrath. Just to be clear, I enjoy using all this weaponry. As I mentioned before, combining everything together is where the real joy of combat lies in this game, but I feel it's at its best during Act 1 and most of Act 2. Once you get to Act 3, Jin is way too strong. I get that it's a samurai power fantasy, but I can't help but feel it goes a little overboard. And for the record, I played this game on lethal difficulty, the hardest setting, and I still felt it was too much. That may be because I have plenty of experience with this game, admittedly. I mean, I would not recommend lethal on anyone's first playthrough, but there is a significant drop-off in challenge, I feel. Act 3 is also where you can start using ghost armor, which is great because it feels right for Jin, narratively speaking, but it is completely busted, even more so if you upgrade it. It reduces enemy detection and the number of kills needed to enter ghost stance, but it also has a chance to terrify enemies, and it happens often. The total enemy count needed to progress is reduced dramatically, making some sections even easier. Some of you may be thinking, well, just don't use ghost armor then. And that's all well and good, but if I have to actively limit myself to maintain the game's challenge, something has gone wrong. Anyway, Jin also has access to 2 different bows for long-range killing potential. Once more, it's simple stuff. There's arrow drops, so you must adjust your crosshair accordingly, and you can get a concentration upgrade to slow things down whilst aiming. I don't know what it is exactly, but archery in this game just feels good. Having a long-range option rounds out your arsenal very nicely, and I use it at every opportunity, as it can be applied to both stealthy endeavors and direct confrontations. I should also mention that bow-wielding opponents make up the final enemy type. They're not affected by stances, so you can kill them willy-nilly, and I greatly appreciate how they give off a clear, audible cue before firing. Considering the lack of a lock-on function and the way the camera needs to be handled manually, this was the perfect choice, as you no longer need to see them to dodge in time, allowing the flow of encounters to continue. Simple but clever design yet again. We're going to come back to full-on fighting momentarily, but for now I want to talk about stealth. Ghost of Tsushima is one of the few games that successfully integrates well-designed melee combat with satisfying stealth mechanics. Those mechanics are standard, though. You can hide in tall grass or jump from rooftop to rooftop, or make use of small openings in buildings and the like, all so you can sneak up on your enemies for an easy, instant kill. The level design of bases and villages always facilitates various methods of traversal, and that is good because there isn't much in the way of creativity with stealth in this game. It's all about carving your own path, and like I said before, there is something rewarding in that. This is where I go back to liberating villages as something I greatly enjoy. I get a lot of fulfillment from methodically taking out enemies one by one. It's a good time. One of my favorite details is how upgrading your Tanto leads to faster and quieter assassinations. It's not just a change in animation, it's a legitimate upgrade that lets you stay on the move. And if enemies do become aware of your presence, there's a super fun melee combat system to fall back on. There are some missions that encourage stealth over swordplay and vice versa, but otherwise you are given some freedom to take on encounters as you wish. This is one of the best things about Ghost of Tsushima to me, and why I rarely find myself bored with the game. The only criticism I have of stealth is that the enemy AI is a bit daft. You can assassinate someone and they are literally writhing in pain, gurgling blood from their mouths, but the enemy standing 5 feet away doesn't notice. This is clearly a gameplay concession to make stealth run smoother, but it just comes off as silly. If the AI was more intelligent, it would encourage a slower, more calculated approach, which would surely amplify the feeling of satisfaction it brings. I also think there is clear room for more creativity with stealth. The game isn't really geared towards creative problem solving as we just discussed, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Finally, we have standoffs, and these are the complete opposite of anything stealth related. The standoffs have you walk straight into the enemy's clutches and invite them to challenge you. By timing your attack input just as the enemy swings their weapon, you'll one-shot your opponent and it feels good. The enemies in the standoffs try to bait you into attacking early, and there's quite a bit of variety in how many feints they go for, and in the length of time they take to attack. Some will do it instantly, whilst others wait for upwards of 5 seconds. Standoffs are one of, if not the best way to refill your resolve, your only method of healing, and they're an amazing option against some of the more difficult opponents in Acts 2 and 3, like the Straw Hat Ronin. The sheer potency of standoffs was too good to ignore, and I used it regularly. There's a broader point I've been leading up to by talking about combat and stealth together, which is, in games where stealth is available, I always tend to gravitate towards it, but in Ghost of Tsushima I find myself switching between stealth and full-on combat all the time. There's a great balance between the two, not just in how well they work, but also in how interchangeable they are. Both are fun and neither feel undercooked. I think Sucker Punch deserve a lot of credit for designing both systems well. If there ever is a sequel, they have given themselves a remarkably solid foundation to build on. Overall, combat in this game is thoroughly enjoyable, with well thought out and cleverly designed systems, all of which work in harmony with one another to give battles a distinct fluidity. That fluidity is tremendously gratifying in action. I don't agree with the notion that Ghost of Tsushima doesn't allow for much expression in combat. If we're talking about sword fighting on its own, maybe not, but the array of options on offer is vast, and combining those options with swordplay is very rewarding. This is where the expression comes from. Likewise, stealth is great. It's basic, but I love the freedom it provides. The standout criticisms for me is that the enemy AI is not smart enough, and things just get completely out of control in the third act, diminishing a lot of the game's challenge. Funnily enough, however, where this is most certainly not the case is in the duels, and these are the best encounters in the game. They are one-on-one, heavily cinematic, fights to the death, taking place in stunning locales, which only heightens how grandiose they are. More importantly though, the difficulty of duels is more consistent. They start off fairly easy and get progressively harder without a steep drop-off. It's a bit of a weird situation where groups of enemies become easier, but the dedicated 1 versus 1 battles get much harder. This does kind of make sense though, because your arsenal is limited in these fights. It's just your sword swings, dodging, and parrying, as well as Dance of Wrath and Heavenly Strike. As such, they are much more skill-based than the open-world encounters, and a lot more intimate as well. I especially love the duels on lethal mode, but some of them feel overly punishing on this difficulty. I know that's the entire point of lethal mode, but still, the biggest offender by far is the Eagle in the DLC. You need superhuman reaction time to deal with some of her attacks. It just seems excessive. These duels are nothing to scoff at, and if you die enough times, the game will offer the chance to abandon the duel, which honestly feels like a slap in the face. But they play out with the same fluidity as any other encounter, and combined with their cinematic presentation and intimate nature, they end up being great fun. The duels are incredible, and collectively they make up the second best thing about this game. I say second best because to me, the absolute highlight of Ghost of Tsushima is its ending. Which ending I am specifically referring to is something we will get to shortly, but first we must cover the narrative. I'm not going to go through the story beat by beat, I just want to touch on a few things here and there. So driving the Mongols away from the island is what the game is all about, but the narrative focuses on how Jin goes about this and the impact his actions have on those around him, namely the people of Tsushima Island and most of all his uncle, Lord Shimura. He is the one who trains Jin to be a samurai, and part of that involves adhering to a code of honor, also known as Bushido, the way of the warrior. Now, I don't really know how accurate this representation of Bushido is. I wouldn't be surprised if they were taking generous liberties, but here it is depicted as the idea that you must face your opponent head-on and look them in the eye, rather than resorting to cheap tricks or dirty tactics. It's made very clear that Shimura has preached this ideal to him in his early days via flashbacks.
When we fight, we face our enemy head-on. When we take their life, we look them in the eye with courage and respect. This is what makes us samurai. Only cowards strike from the shadows.
Jin was just a young boy when his father was murdered right before his eyes, and his actions here, or lack thereof, have haunted him ever since. This is something the game explores more in the DLC, but Jin feels immense guilt for hiding in fear rather than coming to his father's aid. This moment basically defines who Jin is, as after Lord Shimura takes him in and raises him as his own, he asks Jin what honor means to him. His response is protecting people, especially those who cannot fight for themselves. Jin's guilt has manifested itself into a strong desire to protect the less fortunate, and this is key to understanding his character. There's no doubt that Jin respects the samurai code, but ultimately he will break it in the name of protecting people, and this is what pivots him away from his uncle. Even at this early stage, we can see the ideological difference between the two. In the same cutscene, Lord Shimura emphasizes serving their lord with courage, integrity, and self-control. To him, that is what comes first, the self. For if you have no control, how will you lead by example? How will the people respond to your actions as figurehead of the island? I often see Lord Shimura dismissed for the role he plays in the story, but his reasoning is not completely devoid of logic. There is an awful lot more nuance to both Shimura and Jin's actions that I often see people brush off because they reduce the former to the bad guy and the latter to the good guy. It's not black and white like that. It's just that Jin takes a much more pragmatic approach to dealing with the Mongols, and as the audience, it's only natural for us to side with him, and that's before accounting for the loyalty we have to him due to his status as the protagonist. Initially though, Jin is very hesitant. In their early interactions together, he expresses to Yuna repeatedly that he will not break the samurai code. We also see his uncle's words replayed in his mind upon assassinating an enemy. These moments show that he does struggle to come to terms with his actions. However, it soon becomes clear that following the code will play right into the Mongols' hands. Khotun Khan is a formidable adversary because he understands the samurai's traditions and beliefs. The code makes them predictable, and he uses it against them. Jin soon recognizes that they need new ways to surprise the Mongols if they are to claim victory, and this is where the ghost comes in. The ghost is an anomaly without limits, and that is what makes him so dangerous. But that danger extends to those around him, even those he is so desperate to save. Jin uses poison against the Mongols, which at the time seems like a reasonable choice, but they end up using the very same poison themselves. In this way, the game shows how both the samurai and Jin's methods are flawed. The Ghost is a moniker given to Jin by the people after Yuna describes him as a vengeful spirit that has risen to slaughter the Mongols. But the most fascinating thing about the Ghost is that it evolves into something far greater than any individual person. It becomes a symbol, one that inspires hope and fear in equal measure. We see this all throughout the game. During Act 1, the common folk are distressed when they see Jin fight the way he does, describing him as an animal or a demon. But then in Act 2, after the tales of his exploits spread throughout the island, he is only let into Yarikawa when they learn that he is the Ghost. Furthermore, when the people of Yarikawa fight alongside him, they are empowered by his presence. The Mongols lay siege to the town and they scream for the Ghost, and it solidifies his legend. Interestingly enough, this is also where you unlock Ghost Stance, a technique that literally represents the terrifying entity that is the Ghost of Tsushima, striking a fear so powerful in the minds of enemies that they are effectively immobilized. Even after the Mongol invasion has been repelled at the end of the game, the influence of the Ghost continues. Jin and Lord Shimura encounter a peasant who speaks of heading north to join the Ghost's supposed army and burn Mongol homes to the ground in retaliation. The Ghost has united the common folk, but they've been united in a call for war and destruction. This concerns Shimura greatly, and he reiterates the same sentiment he's held this entire time, displaying his own fear. He says, when the new clans arrive, will people bow to their samurai or betray them in the name of the Ghost, just as Jin betrayed him? He's afraid of the anarchy, the distrust and fear that may ensue off the back of Jin's actions, which is entirely valid considering his underhanded methods. This shows the multifaceted nature of the hope and fear the Ghost instills. Lord Shimura is a man who is stubborn, rigid, and prideful. He has his own interpretation of honor, which seems to be a way of preserving the image of the samurai more than anything else, especially in the eyes of the people and the shogun. On occasion, though, we do see him break his honorable code, such as when he agrees to use the Hwachas to destroy the Mongol ships, and when he tells Jin to blame Yuna for poisoning the Mongols. The latter does not paint him in a favorable light, but it does show that he is willing to act beyond the scope of his honor at times. There's also the final battle at Port Izumi, where he swallows his pride and aids in the attack. Still, for Lord Shimura, Jin's actions cut incredibly deep. He displays methods that are more effective than the outdated systems of the samurai, all while exposing his uncle as an ineffectual military commander in front of the shogun's reinforcements. Shimura is then left with no choice but to denounce his own foster son, the man whom he welcomed into his family under his name. We don't see a lot of outward emotion from Shimura, but in their final confrontation together he says, "The wounds you dealt my spirit will never heal, and that this is not his revenge, it's his punishment." I think these lines are very telling and give us insight into Shimura's psyche. He is torn between his love for Jin and his duty to the shogun, but ultimately he is a slave to his honor, and now he has been ordered to take his foster son's life. That is devastating, and judging by his words in their duel, he blames himself. This is part of the reason why I always, and I mean always, choose to kill him. But before we get to that, let's relive the moment leading up to it.
The Shogun has declared you a traitor.
He ordered you to kill me.
The Ghost was an outlaw. He taught our people to defy their leaders.
To defend themselves.
With poison, a gift you gave to our enemy.
I had to stop you from throwing away our people's lives.
You have no honor.
And you are a slave to it.
You are my son. Now I must continue the line of Shimura without you. I must start a new family.
And my head is the cost.
Taking it is my punishment. day together. It is beautiful. It's time. Write the last words of Clan Sakai.
And Clan Shimura.
This final sequence is executed so brilliantly. I adore the dialogue shared between Jin and Lord Shimura here. They're clearly regretful about what has transpired. They still have immense love and respect for each other, but the clash in their ideology spills out once more, and the rift it causes between them is no longer tenable. It is hauntingly beautiful, and the music just could not be any more perfect. What an emotionally powerful conclusion. It's the best part of the game to me. So, when it comes to the ending choice, now, I'm going to be brutally honest here, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but I don't just think the spare ending is worse. I actually find it quite weak compared to the kill ending. Certainly, from a cinematic and emotional standpoint, to me the spare ending doesn't even come close to the kill ending. I mean, it's a much more symbolic gesture, right? If there was ever any doubt over Jin's willingness to embrace the ghost, this act puts all of that to bed. But that seems wholly unnecessary because it's clear he has already embraced it. But this is what makes things tricky. Surely, if he has embraced the ghost as such, then sparing Lord Shimura is the more appropriate action. I completely understand that line of reasoning, but I feel this goes beyond Ghost or Samurai. I don't see it as his final honorable act or anything, but I think Jin would respect his uncle's honor. Now, obviously, if it costs lives on Tsushima Island, Jin is against it, as I mentioned before, and as the story clearly shows. But this is not about the island anymore. It's about the relationship between these two individuals, between a father and son, and that transcends samurai or ghost. People can say honor died on the beach and all that, but it didn't for Lord Shimura, and Jin understands that better than anyone. After everything they've been through, letting him live is like spitting in his face, rubbing salt in the wound, and to me, Jin just would not do that. The symbolic nature of the spare ending lends itself to a lack of catharsis as well. Jin refuses to kill his uncle, he puts on his mask, walks away, and the screen fades to white. I don't get any cathartic relief from that, whereas in the kill ending, they say an emotional farewell, he kills the man and breaks down into tears, screaming in pain whilst embracing him as it fades to white. It's a much more cathartic experience. As I say, cinematically and emotionally, the kill ending is far more powerful. I don't care about frivolous hypotheticals like, oh, Shimura would have failed the shogun and the consequences would catch up to him. I'm not interested in that kind of thing. All I am concerned with is the impact that these two endings have on their own, and to me the spare ending pales in comparison. Killing Lord Shimura is the superior ending, and I will die on that hill. Now, if you disagree, well, okay, you're obviously free to form your own opinions, and I will respect those opinions, but you cannot convince me otherwise. So yeah, that's my hot take on the ending. Look guys, if you prefer the spare ending, that's all that really matters. I'm not trying to convince you of anything here, I'm just explaining why I genuinely think the kill ending is better. Apparently the developers consider the spare ending canon, so make of that what you will. Ghost of Tsushima's story is great. I wouldn't call it amazing or anything, but it has some stellar moments, and that ending is quite special. It is aided by top-notch production values with high-quality acting and facial motion capture performances, both of which serve to heighten emotional scenes, and those are executed very well. Ryuzo, Yuna, Lady Masako, they all have their moments. But again, the standout is the ending. The actors for Jin and Lord Shimura, Daisuke Tsuji and Eric Steinberg respectively, they do a wonderful job here. Seeing Lord Shimura unable to hold back his tears in the build-up to their duel, it really is moving. Otherwise, there are times when the presentation is a little bit stilted, particularly during the small conversational cutscenes where character movement is very basic, but that's a minor complaint. So 1 year after the release of the main game, a director's cut was announced and alongside it a DLC, where Jin travels to a completely different island named Iki. I was not expecting this at all, it seemingly came out of nowhere, but that only made things more exciting. The Iki Island DLC is a continuation of everything great about Ghost of Tsushima, with more content, more story, some interesting gameplay additions here and there, and a stunning landmass to explore. Iki Island becomes available after the beginning of Act 2, but I've only ever ventured there in the post-game. There is some debate over when exactly the best time to start it is, but I don't have a definitive answer to that. I do know that Iki Island comes with quite a big difficulty spike, something the game itself warns you of, but surely if the developers have placed it here, it must be doable, right? There's also the story of the DLC, which is not entirely detached from the main game, but certainly it has nothing to do with the ghost and instead focuses on Jin himself, specifically his relationship with his father. You see, Iki Island is the place where Jin's father was killed after leading a pacification campaign against the criminals and raiders that occupy it. Because of this, over there he is known as the Butcher of Iki. This story is all about Jin confronting his past, accepting his father's shortcomings, and learning to forgive himself for not aiding him when he was killed. After arriving on the island, Jin is captured by the Mongols and is forced to drink the sacred medicine of their leader known as the Eagle. This has Jin hallucinate visions of his father and his past failings, literally forcing him to overcome his trauma. This is complemented by a set of optional memories scattered all over the island that give us a glimpse into the kind of person Kazumasa Sakai really was. A man who loses his way after the death of his wife and leads a ruthless campaign against the people of Iki, tarnishing the reputation of Clan Sakai and the samurai in the process. But again, this is just a small glimpse. There are only 5 memories, and the last one takes place after Kazumasa's death, so we don't get to see that much of him. Anyway, after escaping the Eagle's capture, Jin is rescued by a raider named Tenzo, who takes him to their leader, and together they reluctantly form a small alliance. Shenanigans ensue, and eventually Jin learns that Tenzo is the one who murdered his father, something he realizes after the raider utters the same words just before killing Kazumasa. Jin comes very close to killing the man, but controls himself, proving that he is not the same butcher as his father. Together with the raiders, Jin has a final showdown against the Eagle, but halfway through collapses from the hallucinations. He receives one more vision of his father's final moments, but this time he saves him. After a heart-to-heart chat, Jin comes to terms with his father's death and acknowledges his faults. He overcomes the sacred medicine and fights the Eagle once more, and the transition back into the fight is spectacular. There's a brilliant musical piece accompanying it. Jin slays the Eagle once and for all, and he and Tenzo forgive each other before parting ways. The story of the DLC is nothing grand or epic, and it's pretty short as well, but I find it a refreshing change-up from the main narrative. I like that it focuses on Jin himself, rather than the ghost. In fact, the only time we ever hear of the ghost is from Kenji, who makes an appearance, and is masquerading as the Ghost of Iki, which I honestly find hilarious. Jin and Tenzo become unlikely allies, and there's a lot of tension and disagreement between them, especially when the latter finds out that Jin is the son of Kazumasa Sakai. Tenzo's unwavering hatred for the samurai is difficult for him to fully comprehend at first, but that's just a part of his journey, understanding the islanders' perception of Kazumasa and rising above that. Jin is forced to question his family's role in a brutal subjugation crusade, and that allows for a lot of introspection. As a villain, the Eagle is nowhere near as menacing as Khotun Khan. She doesn't have much presence in this story, but really she's just a conduit to explore Jin's past. I must say, the whole hallucination in the middle of gameplay thing wears out its welcome quickly though. The ending sequence against the eagle, with Jin's vision of his father and the way him and Tenzo make amends, is a satisfying way to wrap up the story. It never reaches the emotional heights of the main narrative, but it is enjoyable, and I appreciate the added depth it provides. In terms of gameplay, Iki Island is basically just more of what you find in the main game, but with some added flair. A new type of enemy called shamans are introduced that empower their allies via chanting. This makes them nigh impossible to stagger with your sword swings, so prioritizing shamans in every engagement is essential. This doesn't really change the dynamic of combat in any big way, they just need to be taken out first. Enemies are generally more aggressive on Iki Island, especially the archers who pelt you with arrows faster than ever before. In addition to this, they can now hold up to 3 different types of weapons and switch between them frequently. Again, this does not change combat in any big way, it's just a means of keeping you on your toes, forcing you to stance even more. However, weapon switching is also present in duels, and this is where it shines brightest to me. The encounter against Kun Bish during the Fort Sakai quest is one of the hardest fights in the entire game, possibly the hardest. He uses a mix of 3 different weapons, so his array of attacks is a lot more varied than usual, leading to a very difficult and highly dynamic engagement. Functionally, it's no different than any other goon using a different weapon, but the restricted nature of duels makes a noticeably bigger difference in comparison. Timing, weapon swings, the windows between attacks, it's all heightened during duels, and different types of weaponry takes this even further. Unfortunately, only 2 of the 4 duels feature weapon switching, Kun Bish and the Eagle, and the former is much better than the latter. Cinematically, the fight against the Eagle is brilliant, but as I said earlier in the video, you need crazy reaction time to deal with some of her attacks, and I don't like it. Maybe I'm just getting old, but on lethal mode, this fight is a pain. Extra combat techniques like the horse charge is an effective way of mowing down enemies, but the best addition Iki brings is the saddle bag, a storage item for ranged and quickfire weapons, such as kunai and the like. If you pick some up and Jin is at full capacity, it will automatically be sent to your horse, and you restock your supply every time you mount your horse. This is highly convenient and all but assures you will never run out of ranged weaponry again. There are no long tails in the DLC, but to make up for that, the side quests are a bit more involved than previously, with some having multiple parts and 1 or 2 having extra parts that are completely optional. There's a moment in Kenji's questline where you speak with a guy called the Viper, and depending on what dialogue choices you choose, it can potentially lead to a duel with him. Then there's a quest where a group of Mongols have taken 2 hostages, and you must decide which one to save, leading to the demise of the other. This kind of choice and consequence did not exist at all in the main game, and it makes these quests memorable. I also enjoyed the quests with Sugi, who seems like she dies in battle towards the end, but if you head back to the village where it all started, something the game does not tell you to do, you learn that she actually faked her death and wishes Jin well. Small things like this give quests charm, and I appreciate the developers using the DLC as a means of making them more fulfilling. Otherwise, the rest of Iki Island is standard stuff. There are 2 mythical tales, I love the duel against Blackhand Riku, as well as extra busy work like archery challenges and animal sanctuaries. I find these infinitely more engaging than the haikus and hot springs because they actually require meaningful input from the player. Then there's the Hidden Cove tournament where you duel a total of 4 opponents for cosmetic rewards, and the Crimson Dye Merchant. These tournament duels have you fight against unique opponents who can kick you, punch you, throw sand at you, etc. You need to think outside the box a bit here, especially against the final 2 combatants. It's just a small creative twist on the already fantastic duels, and they are fun fights. The island itself is a stunning landmass. It's bright, colourful, and I love the proximity to the ocean. The clear blue waters crashing onto shore against the sunny backdrop is beautiful, but inland is full of great locales as well. It's a very short DLC, but it brings with it some genuinely refreshing ideas that I kind of wish were in the main game, but I'm glad to see them here either way. And that is Ghost of Tsushima, ladies and gentlemen. Sucker Punch's swan song to the PlayStation 4 is an absolute joy. It has its problems, just like any title, but none of them feel especially egregious, and at the end of the day, it is so much fun. I'm not going to sit here and rehash everything I like about the game, I think I've made that clear enough already, but something I will re-emphasize is its simplicity. The core systems that make up Ghost of Tsushima are very simple, but they are used to great effect. Nothing is overly complicated, the game is easy to understand, and yet it's still bursting with personality through unique features such as the guiding wind, its art direction, and its distinct flavor of cinematic presentation. I'm not really informed enough to say whether this is a worthy tribute to classic samurai cinema, but at the very least I think it does a good job bridging the gap, reaching Western audiences. Forgive my ignorance, but I had no idea who Akira Kurosawa was before this game, and I had never heard of Tsushima Island either. There is value in spreading information like that, and apparently the mayor of Tsushima Island thinks so as well. The creative leads at Sucker Punch, Nate Fox and Jason Connell, were made permanent tourism ambassadors of the island for, quote, spreading the name and history of Tsushima to the whole world in such a wonderful way. That is a really lovely gesture. Will there be a sequel? Honestly, I don't know. There is part of me that thinks Jin's story is well and truly over, but at the same time, the prospect of playing as the Ghost in mainland Japan sounds extremely enticing. I definitely think it would have to be set outside of Tsushima Island, and mainland Japan is the most logical next step, right? If that was the case, then the sequel would have enormous potential, but I guess only time will tell. Either way, if Sucker Punch apply the same level of dedication and attention to detail to their next major title, it's sure to be something worth playing. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, then you should hit the subscribe button. Cheers.